When I was in the military, you spent a lot of time just waiting. And in that downtime, you got to know people, not just guys from different states, but soldiers from other countries too. And I'll never forget the conversations we had about America. They weren't hostile or angry. It was almost worse. It was kind of gentle, confused disappointment. They'd talk about what they saw on our news, the things our celebrities did, the arguments we had online, and they just couldn't make it make sense. They'd look at me and ask how a country with so much could act so foolishly. The most heartbreaking part wasn't the criticism. It was that deep down, I knew they were right. It was like they could see the sickness in us that we refuse to see in ourselves. And it left me with a question I still can't shake. What happens when the rest of the world has more common sense about your country than you do? That question, that feeling of a sickness in society, that's exactly what we're going on a deep dive to unpack today. We're going to explore some truly fascinating insights into why we might feel this way, this kind of societal malaise. Mm-hmm. We'll look at how values shift across generations, the profound and, frankly, often troubling impact of our digital lives.
Yeah.
And maybe surprisingly, the role that spiritual connection might play in helping us find our way back to some sense of, common ground and collective well-being.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that we're not just talking about isolated problems, little issues here and there.
Right.
We're looking at a really tangled knot of social phenomena. I mean, from the subtle ways we raise our kids to what we're scrolling through online every single day, to our very deepest search for meaning. We'll try and explore how these seemingly disparate pieces, how they connect to paint a picture, a sort of comprehensive picture of our current societal landscape.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, what it might mean for the future of what we used to think of as, collective common sense.
The fading echo of common sense. Generational divides and shifting values.
I read a comment online the other day, and it really stuck with me. It was from this man, maybe late 50s, let's call him David.
Okay.
And he was talking about just a simple trip to the grocery store. He's in the express lane, right?
Oh.
And this young mother with a full cart, way over the item limit, just cuts in front of everyone.
Oh, boy.
And her toddler is having a complete meltdown in the cart, screaming, throwing stuff. David remembered, a time when other shoppers might have said something supportive.
Yeah, or just a kind look.
Or at least a sympathetic glance. But instead, what he saw was just stony faces, people deliberately looking down at their phones, just annoyed.
Ignoring it.
Totally ignoring it. The cashier looked completely exhausted, didn't say a word. And the young mother, she looked, kind of flushed, defiant, but also embarrassed, didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge anyone. And David said he didn't feel anger exactly. It was more like this deep melancholy.
Wow, melancholy.
Yeah, like a little tear in the social fabric, he called it. He remembered his own mom teaching him, always hold the door, say, excuse me, just be aware of other people's space and time.
Basic stuff, yeah.
Basic stuff. And he was wondering, is that lesson still being taught? Is it even about the rules of the checkout line anymore? Or is it about that unspoken agreement, to just be a community even for 5 minutes in a store?
That David's experience really hits on something, doesn't it? It raises so many questions about how we interact now in public. What do you see in his story that kind of speaks to these generational shifts we're digging into?
Well, it just feels like something's shifted. That basic consideration, it feels less common.
I think David's observation really taps into a broader generational disconnect. It's becoming increasingly apparent in society. What he saw as a breakdown of common sense courtesy, well, it's often viewed differently by younger generations.
That's so.
They've grown up in such a vastly different social and economic landscape. This isn't just about surface level differences. It's about deep-seated value orientations. We've seen some really fascinating research looking at cultural evolution, measuring differences in generational values. And it points out how millennials and Gen Z, they're approaching adulthood with really unique attitudes. Different outlooks compared to older age cohorts.
Unique how? What are the key differences?
Specifically, these younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, they tend to be more egalitarian. So prioritizing equality, fairness among people.
Okay, that sounds good.
Right. But also significantly more fatalistic.
Fatalistic? What does that mean in this context? Like doom and gloom?
Sort of. It suggests a sense that events are predetermined, often beyond your individual control. And you can imagine how that might influence everything, right? From how someone sees personal responsibility to, say, civic engagement.
Yeah, definitely. If you feel like you can't change things.
Exactly. It's a pretty stark contrast to the more maybe optimistic or agency-driven outlooks often attributed to previous generations. And interestingly, it gets even more complex. If you look at trends within people of color, older cohorts are actually more egalitarian than their white counterparts. But younger generations of color are showing a shift. They're becoming more individualistic and hierarchical than white members of their own generation.
Wow, okay, so it's not just one simple trend across the board.
Not at all. It really complicates the narrative. We can't just paint these broad strokes about generational shifts applying the same way to everyone.
That is a crucial point. And you mentioned values being compressed. Does that mean more common ground or something else? Because David's story doesn't feel like common ground.
That's a great question. It could mean common ground on certain broad principles, theoretically, but it doesn't necessarily translate to a shared understanding of what those principles look like day to day, like in the grocery store.
Right.
And this is potentially complicated even further by how different generations seem to process moral information. There's a study that looked at moral processing styles, and it suggests a potential shift. Gen Z scored lower on something called need for moral cognition.
Need for moral cognition. What's that?
It basically measures how much individuals engage in, like, explicit moral reasoning, thinking through ethical dilemmas logically, step by step. Gen Z scored lower on that compared to Gen X.
But what about gut feelings, intuition?
Well, there wasn't a significant difference found in faith and moral intuition, trusting your gut about right and wrong. However, the gap between relying on intuition versus relying on that deep moral reasoning, that gap was much larger for Gen X.
Meaning
it suggests a possible trend where that explicit moral reasoning, thinking things through logically, is maybe less valued or less actively engaged with by the younger generation.
So if our moral compass is guided more by, like, immediate feeling, gut reaction,
right,
rather than deliberate thought,
right,
how might that impact, well, everything? Public discourse, problem solving, even just basic courtesy like David saw.
It raises a huge question, doesn't it? If we're leaning more on instinct than reasoned thought, it really changes how we approach things, from a simple interaction in a store to really complex public policy debates.
It makes you think about that phrase, some people throw around, that we might be living in an idiot society. It sounds harsh, and maybe it's cynical, but it sort of captures a feeling people seem to have. Is that just cynicism, or is there more to it?
It's a provocative idea, for sure.
Yeah, and another angle I saw was someone asking why the parents' generation might have given, like, free passes to younger generations for things they themselves wouldn't have gotten away with.
That adds another layer, doesn't it? That perceived shift in expectations or responsibility between generations.
Exactly. It's not just different values, it's maybe different standards being applied.
And what's really important to grasp here is that this feeling, this generational friction, it isn't just an American thing or, happening in one or two places.
Oh, right.
No, there's data from a big perception survey on generational conflict. And it highlights that this is seen as a serious global concern, like a staggering 84% of people.
84%.
Yeah, 84% across all age groups see generational conflict as serious in society. And what's maybe even more concerning is the outlook.
Let me guess. Not optimistic.
Not at all. More than half, 55%, predict this conflict will actually get more severe.
Wow.
And this pessimism, it's growing, especially among younger folks. There was a 29 percentage point jump among 18 to 29-year-olds predicting it'll get worse compared to just a year ago, and a 16-point jump for those in their 30s.
So younger people are feeling this intensifying conflict the most. Or predicting it.
They're predicting it will worsen more dramatically, yeah. And when you ask who's actually harmed by this conflict, you see a real split.
Okay.
About 45% think both younger and older generations are equally harmed. Makes sense. But younger groups, those 18 to 30s, they're more likely to see the younger generation as the primary victims.
And older people see the older generation as victims.
Exactly, especially those 70 plus. About a third of them, 32%, see the older generation as the ones being harmed most.
Man, that just fuels the fire, doesn't it? If everyone feels like they're the ones getting the short end of the stick.
Precisely. It makes finding common ground incredibly difficult.
So what did the survey say were the main causes? Why is this happening?
Well, the number one reason cited by over half the respondents, 55%, was differences in values between generations. which lines up perfectly with what we were just discussing.
Right.
But it's not the only factor. Other big ones were inciting generational conflict by the media and politics. That was 44%.
Yeah, you see that.
And economic instability of the youth, things like jobs and housing, that was 41%. So real-world pressures are definitely playing a role.
Makes sense.
Also, things like lack of effort and mutual understanding and just differences in growth environment were mentioned by about a third of people.
So pulling back to the bigger picture, what does this all tell us?
It highlights, I think, a really profound communication gap and a values gap. You've got about 4 out of 10 people saying they find it genuinely difficult to communicate and collaborate with other generations.
4 out of 10, that's a lot.
It is, and it goes both ways. Younger people struggle to talk to older people, and older people struggle to talk to younger people. It's this mutual difficulty.
Oh.
And it suggests that maybe that sickness you mentioned at the start, that feeling of something being off, maybe it's rooted in this growing inability for different generations to truly connect or even, understand each other's basic viewpoints and experiences.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of a society that's getting more and more siloed by age, struggling to find a common language, a shared purpose. Kind of like David's feeling of that tear in the social fabric.
Exactly.
The digital quicksand, mental health in the connected age.
And that generational divide, those feelings of isolation, it feels like they're just intensely amplified by, well, everything digital, our whole online environment.
Oh, absolutely.
I saw this post online. It was just raw, a cry for help, really. But a story that probably feels really familiar to a lot of people, especially younger people. It was from a teenager. Let's call her Chloe. And she described her evenings. It was haunting, almost. School ends. She immediately goes to her room, phone in hand.
The ritual.
Totally.
Yep.
Checks friends' stories first. Slideshow of parties she wasn't invited to. Friendships that look closer than hers. And this little knot of anxiety just forms in her stomach.
Yeah, the comparison trap.
Big time. Then she falls into the endless TikTok scroll. An hour goes by. Then 2, then 3. She called it numb time.
Numb time, wow.
Yeah. Not happy, not sad, just scrolling. And the stuff she sees. Videos about unsolved crimes make her paranoid. Videos of impossibly perfect influencers make her feel totally inadequate. Videos about global crises make her feel helpless. And she wrote, I know it's poisoning my brain, but I can't stop. The silence without it is louder and scarier.
That is incredibly insightful and sad.
Isn't it? And then one night, her internet goes out. The sudden quiet, she said it was deafening. She's pacing, fidgeting, feels this overwhelming urge to cry. For the first time, she's totally alone with her thoughts.
Oh.
And she realizes she doesn't even know who she is without that constant stream of digital input.
That's powerful and terrifying.
Heartbreakingly vivid, right? It just perfectly shows how these platforms, supposedly built for connection, can ironically just erode your sense of self, replace real connection with something hollow. What does the research tell us about this psychological toll?
Chloe's story resonates so deeply because what she's describing, that doom scrolling, the habit of just endlessly consuming negative news in the online comparison game.
Yeah.
These aren't just buzzwords anymore. They are active agents shaping the mental health of, well, potentially everyone, but especially younger generations. That constant stream of bad news, curated perfect lives, it takes a massive psychological toll.
How specifically?
Well, there's research on doom scrolling and existential anxiety. A study surveyed about 800 university students in the US and Iran, actually, and found a direct link between spending excessive time on negative news and feelings of, yes, existential anxiety, but also increased distrust, suspicion of others, and just a pervasive sense of despair.
Despair, wow.
The researchers theorized that this constant bombardment reinforces the idea that, humankind is imperfect and there's no justice in the world. It creates a kind of vicarious trauma.
Vicarious trauma.
Yeah.
Meaning you feel traumatized even if it didn't happen to you.
Exactly. You're detrimentally affected despite not experiencing the trauma firsthand. And this exposure impacts really fundamental beliefs about your own mortality, how much control you have over your life. It leads to thoughts like life is fragile and limited, humans are fundamentally alone, individuals don't have full control. And for the Iranian students in that study, doom scrolling was also linked to misanthropy.
Misanthropy. Like hating humanity.
A profound hatred and distrust towards humankind, yeah. And there's an expert, Dr. Joanne Orlando, she compared the long-term effect. She said it's like being in a room where people are continuously shouting at you.
Oof. Yeah, I can imagine that.
And she believes it profoundly impacts how you understand the world and your place in it. And critically, she thinks these findings apply to all ages, not just students.
That's a really powerful analogy. It makes you wonder. We live in this age of information, right? It's at an all-time high, as someone put it. But how do you discern? How do you grow from what you consume online when so much of it can be so, well, detrimental?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, and I saw another comment that really nailed this, talking about being stuck online, comparing yourself to people, and being spiteful, and just pleading, please stop reliving hate. It's like the digital world meant to connect us, just ends up amplifying our worst instincts sometimes, our insecurities, our resentments.
It can feel like a negative feedback loop, can it? The more disconnected or inadequate you feel, maybe the more you scroll.
Right.
Which then just deepens that feeling of disconnection or inadequacy. It's a real modern trap.
A trap that feels almost impossible to escape sometimes without like a really conscious effort to build different kinds of connections. Offline connections, maybe?
Or at least connections with more substance, yeah.
Yeah.
Because this constant digital immersion, like Chloe's story shows, it can leave you feeling anxious, inadequate. It erodes that stable sense of self. It replaces genuine connection with something hollow. It's a real paradox of our time.
And connecting this back to that sickness idea from the opening, I saw something suggesting that the rise in mental health issues, particularly in the States, is also linked to maybe a decline in belief, like a lack of belief in God or not putting that first, implying there's maybe a deeper void there, an existential emptiness maybe, going alongside the digital one we just talked about.
That's a fascinating point. It suggests that the purely psychological or technological explanations might not capture the whole picture, that there could be a spiritual dimension to this crisis that we often overlook when we're just talking about, screen time or algorithms.
Exactly. Which kind of leads us into our next thought.
Rediscovering purpose, the potential of spirituality and community.
Right. So if these modern problems, the generational gaps, the digital despair, if they're tied to this deeper feeling of fragmentation, this search for meaning, where do we look for answers? Maybe it's not just more therapy. Maybe it's not just new policies. What if it's something more fundamental, something about meaning and connection that maybe we've lost touch with?
An alternative path, perhaps?
Yeah. Let's imagine someone, let's call her Sarah, maybe 28, successful graphic designer, lives in a city like Chicago. On the surface, she's got it all figured out, right? Great career, cool apartment, lots of friends.
Living the dream, supposedly.
Supposedly. Yet underneath, she's drowning in this quiet panic, the constant phone buzz, the relentless bad news cycle, the curated perfection she sees on Instagram. It's just hollowed out her sense of self.
Sounds familiar.
Right. Therapy helps, gives her coping tools, but she feels like she's just patching holes in a sinking ship. It's not fixing the underlying issue. So one evening, feeling really lost, she walks past this old church, not a huge cathedral, just a simple brick building. Sign says, all are welcome for quiet reflection.
Okay.
On a whim, she goes in. It's mostly empty, quiet, dim light, just the faint hum of the city outside. She sits down in a pew. She's not religious, really, not praying in a traditional way, just sitting, existing without expectation.
Finding stillness.
Exactly. And in that stillness, away from all the digital noise, she feels this tiny flicker of peace for the first time in ages.
Wow.
So she starts going back, not for sermons, just for the silence. Eventually, she joins the small group there. They meditate together, and then they pack lunches for a local shelter. Simple stuff.
Shared activity. Yeah. And it was in that simple shared purpose, that's where she started to find an anchor, something solid.
Sarah's story is such a powerful counter-narrative, isn't it? It pushes back against the idea that the mental health crisis is purely chemical or just about individual psychology.
Right.
It strongly suggests there's this spiritual component, this deep hunger for meaning, for real connection, for something bigger than the daily chaos and the digital noise.
Yeah.
It implies that maybe the solutions need to address that deeper spiritual dimension too. And when you look into how religion, broadly speaking, affects mental health, there's actually quite a bit there.
Like what? What are the positives?
Well, research and anecdotes suggest religion can provide a stable philosophy for life, a basis to guide your existence. It can offer peace, act as a defense against anxiety, help people cope with life's difficulties, find meaning in challenges, and importantly, it doesn't necessarily make people less capable of handling problems or act as an excuse to avoid them.
That's a key distinction. It's not just an escape.
Exactly. People share experiences about finding increased meaning, having an easier time dealing with anxiety or depression, recovering faster from depressive episodes, just a general easing of existential worry.
Wow.
They talk about finding strength in tough times, finding healing in scripture, feeling an upliftment of confidence, of personality. It points to a really powerful internal transformation.
Beyond just coping.
Way beyond coping. It can offer answers, or at least frameworks, for those huge questions. Why are we here? What happens after death? Am I loved?
Yeah.
And beyond the individual, there's the community aspect. That can be incredibly cathartic, having a shared space for support, for understanding. It can diffuse a lot of mental health struggles.
And it's not just like a modern thing, right?
Yeah.
This isn't the new idea. History seems full of these moments.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at spiritual awakenings throughout history, going back centuries, it's not limited by denomination, not limited by region. It's a recurring human phenomenon.
Like the Great Awakening back in the 1700s.
Exactly. That touched hundreds of thousands in the American colonies. Or think about the Second Great Awakening, which was linked to major moral reforms like temperance and women's emancipation. Or the businessmen's revival in the mid-1800s, started by one guy holding prayer meetings, led to 1 million new church members. The Welsh revival, the Azusa Street revival in LA.
Azusa Street, that was the really diverse one, right?
Incredibly diverse for its time, yeah. Led by an African-American pastor, William Seymour. Integrated audience meeting daily, praying, singing. It spread globally within just a couple of years.
Wow.
Even post-World War II, you had figures like Billy Graham, movements like Youth for Christ, Campus Crusade for Christ, revivals on college campuses, and then the Jesus People movement in the 60s and 70s among hippies, helping thousands find a path away from drugs and disillusionment.
So these aren't just small pockets, these are significant societal shifts.
Absolutely, and they're still happening. Think about the house church movement in China. Estimates are around 100 million members. That's a monumental, ongoing spiritual movement. These historical examples show a powerful capacity for collective transformation, driven by a renewed spiritual focus. It consistently points to some deeper human need being met.
Okay, so it's clear that religion and spirituality have been these powerful forces for cohesion, for well-being. What does that mean, though, in terms of a solution? I read about this thinker, Howard Brinton.
Yes. Brinton, insightful writer on Quakerism and community.
Right. He talked about the social problem being excessive individualism, which sounds pretty relevant today.
Very relevant.
And he argued we need a remedy that respects individual rights but overcomes that excessive individualism. But he said religion provides power, not tools nor blueprints. What did he mean by that?
It's a great analogy. He saw many social reformers as being like builders whose fires are going out under their boilers.
I like that.
Yeah, they have the plans, they have the materials, the blueprints, the tools, but they lack the driving force, the underlying energy, the spiritual power to actually make the transformation happen.
Gotcha. So religion supplies the oomph, the motivation.
The oomph, the living energy, exactly. Brinton then looked at historical examples, like the primitive Christian solution and the early Quaker solution. What's key for both, he argued, was their emphasis on a purely spiritual kind of unity.
Not rules and structures.
Less about outer mechanical bonds, more about a living infusion of the Spirit. The early church saw itself as the mystical body of Christ. Salvation wasn't just about you and God, it was a social process.
Social. How?
Sin, in this view, is fundamentally estrangement, feeling lonely, cut off, incomplete. Salvation is overcoming that isolation by uniting with a greater life, a life that connects you both to God and to other people. This presence was felt as divine, creating new life in the individual and the group.
Okay, I think I get that. And the Quakers took it even further.
Brinton argued they did. They gave up external rituals, almost entirely baptism, communion focusing purely on an inner spiritual reality. The only bond was the Spirit. The only creed was truth experienced directly, fresh from the eternal fountain.
Wow.
And crucially, the authority wasn't the individual's opinion or inner light alone. That could lead to chaos, like with groups called the Ranters back then. For the Quakers, the authority was the sense of the meeting.
The sense of the meeting, the group consensus.
More than just consensus, it was this idea of a communal light. Individual insight was brought to the group, and through shared waiting and listening, it could be elevated into something higher and more inclusive.
Transmuted.
Exactly. Transmuted into a more complete whole. And this process, Brinton believed, released incredible spiritual energy for incalculable practical use. It generated a collective power far greater than the sum of its parts.
That's a really different way of thinking about group decision-making.
It is. And Brinton gets really sharp when he distinguishes this kind of religiously integrated group from other attempts to solve that problem of over-individualism.
Like what other attempts?
Well, he points to autocracy, things like fascism, communism, extreme nationalism. They try to force unity, right? But Brinton saw that as a sign of decadence. It's a mechanical bond imposed from outside. It leaves a mechanism behind, but the soul, the life, has fled.
Okay. Forced unity doesn't work. What else?
World renunciation. Think asceticism, solitary mysticism, maybe some forms of Buddhism that aim primarily to destroy the ego. Brinton acknowledged this might solve the individual's problem of suffering or isolation.
But not the social problem.
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily build community or transform society. It can even become an escape, what some critics called the opiate of the people. A healthy religion, Brinton argued, needs to balance this inner journey with world affirmation, with good works, with engagement in the world.
So what's the sweet spot then?
The sweet spot for Brinton is the religiously integrated group. In this model, the individual isn't suppressed or eliminated. Instead, individuality is kind of regained, but on a higher plane.
How?
They're united internally, not by force, but by love of God. That vertical bond and love of one another, the horizontal bonds, it forms a living, organic unity.
Right.
And that, he believed, is what generates genuine spiritual power, power that can transform individuals and, through them, the world. It's that social cement he talks about, binding from within.
Okay, that makes sense as an ideal, but we also have to be real about the downsides, right? Religion isn't always like that.
Absolutely crucial point. And the sources we looked at are very clear on the cons. The critiques are often aimed not at the core belief itself, but at the institution or at misguided people within it.
Yeah.
We hear about judgmental, hateful, aggressive attitudes that push people away instead of drawing them in. Exclusion, judgment, ostracism within religious groups that causes immense pain. It can destroy the very community that's supposed to be beneficial.
Using religion to justify bad behavior.
A huge criticism, judging others, excusing your own negative actions. And then there's the internal stuff. Religious guilt, self-hatred, even religious OCD, often stemming from misinterpreting scripture or pressure from others.
Right. I remember the quote, who gave a person to tell person over the age of 18 how to live life? The church. You mean the church with your everyday Sadducees and Pharisees.
Yeah, that captures the frustration perfectly, doesn't it? Frustration with dogmatic, judgmental institutions that seem to lose sight of the unifying, loving core.
So the power isn't in the rules or the building.
The power, Brinton would argue, and maybe Sarah's story illustrates, lies in that spirit in the mist, the thing that creates genuine community, not rigid dogma. And maybe that sickness from the military story, maybe it is this social disintegration, this loss of inner cohesion that true spiritual community aims to address, which is different from just organized religion.
That's a really important distinction.
Bringing it all together, the quest for cohesion.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. What does it all mean? We started with that really poignant story from the military, right? That sense of a sickness in society.
Yeah.
This confused disappointment from outsiders looking in.
Yeah, that feeling that something's fundamentally off.
And we've kind of explored how that feeling might be rooted in these shifting values between generations. The really deep and often isolating impact of our digital lives.
Definitely.
And then this historical and psychological role that spiritual community or the lack of it might play. It feels like that atomization Brinton described, society crumbling when inner cohesion is lost. It sounds eerily similar to the loneliness and isolation from doom scrolling, from online comparison, like in Chloe's story.
I think there's a strong parallel there. If we look at the bigger picture, this perceived decline in common sense, in basic civility. It doesn't seem to be just about manners, does it?
No, it feels deeper.
It seems deeply tied to how younger generations might be processing information and morality differently, combined with these profound mental health challenges coming from the constant barrage of negative digital input.
And that fatalism you mentioned earlier
Yep.
among younger generations.
Right. That could very well be a direct consequence of this. Constant exposure to overwhelming negative news, often feeling like you have no control, no collective agency.
Yeah, I can see that. Leads to a sense of what's the point.
Exactly. A sense of fatalism can easily set in. But then the historical insights, the psychological perspectives on spiritual community, like Sarah finding her anchor, They offer a really powerful counterpoint to all this disintegration.
Right. It's not about forcing one specific belief system.
Not at all. It seems to be more about tapping into that fundamental human need, the need for connection, for meaning, for a sense of higher unity that goes beyond just our isolated selves.
So the core problem, as Brinton put it, is that excessive individualism.
That seems to be the diagnosis, yes. Whether it shows up as, rudeness at the grocery store, or the isolating bubble of social media, or just this general feeling of society fragmenting. The answer, he suggested, lies in finding that social cement which binds from within. So the unity isn't forced, it's not mechanical, it's living.
A living unity.
Yeah, it's in that inner bond, the bond between humans and something greater, maybe God, maybe spirit, and therefore the bond between human and human. Concepts like the blood of the new covenant or the Christ within for the Quakers, they were symbols of this interconnection.
Right.
That's where the power for social salvation, as Brinton called it, was sought. It's fundamentally about overcoming estrangement, overcoming that profound sense of loneliness and separation that seems so characteristic of our modern world.
Overcoming estrangement. Outro. Wow. This deep dive, it's really shown, I think, how interconnected all these issues are. The fraying social fabric, the mental health crisis, the generational divides, they aren't separate problems.
They seem to feed into each other.
Yeah, and they all seem to point towards this deeper longing, a longing for meaning, for belonging, something that clearly individual success or endless digital connection just can't satisfy on its own.
Perhaps the ultimate common sense we need to cultivate now, both individually and as a society. Perhaps it isn't about knowing more facts or winning more arguments online.
Right.
Maybe it's about rediscovering the profound, truly transformative power of genuine human connection. Connection forged in maybe a shared aspiration for something larger than ourselves. A unity, like Brinton described, that allows us to truly find ourselves by paradoxically losing ourselves in something more complete.